What's up, guys? My name's Brandon, and welcome back to Apple Weekly. In this episode, we're going to discuss even more new features in iOS 18.3 and also talk about why iOS 18.4 is going to be a major update. We have an update on CarPlay 2.0, bad news for the iPhone 17, an update on the upcoming iPhone SE, and more. And as always, if you want to stay updated with everything going on in the world of Apple, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Okay, so let's start by talking about iOS 18.3 because just this past week, Apple released the RC or release candidate build of iOS 18.3, which is mostly going to be the final version. I do think we'll have an additional feature in the final release, but we'll talk about that here in a moment. So let's talk about what's new in this RC because there were a couple of minor changes here. So first off, if we take a look at the release notes, you can see that we have some bug fixes that were not talked about previously. So first off, fixes an issue where the keyboard might disappear when initiating a typed Siri request. So that's been fixed. And also there's a fix for audio playback that continued to play until the song ends, even after closing Apple Music. So that was a weird bug. I've never experienced that, but that was fixed. But perhaps the biggest change in iOS 18.3, which this was just discovered in the RC release, is that Apple Intelligence is now going to be enabled by default. So I think this might cause a little bit of controversy because, in the beginning, Apple said that it would be off. You'd have to enable it by default. You'd have to opt in. But if you go into Apple Intelligence and Siri, now after you install iOS 18.3, this will automatically be enabled. So now you're going to have to opt out of Apple Intelligence instead of opting in. It's going to be kind of forced on people. And I can already see headlines being made about this. So just so you guys know, before the headlines, there's going to be some controversy, I think, related to Apple Intelligence being enabled by default. But that's coming with 18.3. So if you're somebody who never used it before, prepare to at least get a taste of it initially before you have to manually turn it off. But to be honest, I think Apple Intelligence is very useful in some cases. I don't think it's like the best thing on earth, but there are some, good situations where it's actually beneficial. Like, for notifications, if we go into summarized notifications, of course, one of the big changes here in iOS 18.3 as well is the new prompt here. And when you select news and entertainment, it is temporarily unavailable because Apple has been criticized multiple times for sharing, false headlines with these AI summaries. So that is one thing you'll have to keep in mind as well. I think the summarized notifications are great. Personally, for me, they've been great, but that is something to be aware of. Now you can see that we also have a couple of new visual intelligence features with iOS 18.3. So you can now add an event to calendar from a poster or a flyer. And you can also easily identify plants and animals by pulling out visual intelligence and just holding that plant in front of the camera. You don't have to press anything. It's different from the, ChatGPT search and everything like that. You just hold it in front and it will automatically tell you up top what that plant is, which is pretty cool actually. Now I mentioned in the intro that iOS 18.3, the final release, is most likely going to be a different build. It's going to have a different build number than the RC release. And that's because we should be seeing new Unity wallpapers. If you guys remember, usually in previous years, the 0.3 updates include the Unity wallpapers. That's what we've seen for a few years now. So I would expect that to continue here with 18.3. So we might not see that until the official public release. I'm sure Apple will have something on their newsroom about these wallpapers being available. And of course, it will likely come with a watch face as well for watchOS. So just prepare yourselves. If you have the RC, you're probably going to get an update when 18.3 releases to everybody, and it will be slightly different. So a wallpaper is a pretty small change, and really everything in iOS 18.3 is relatively small in terms of new features and changes. However, we're going to see some pretty significant new features with iOS 18.4, which we should see that first beta next week. And we'll talk about the release dates here in a moment. But 18.4 is going to be big because this is going to include the upgraded Siri. It's not going to be full Siri 2.0 yet, but it's going to be, one of the big steps forward that Siri needs. And if you look at Apple's website, it looks like the three things that are going to be coming are number one, on-screen awareness. So Siri is going to be able to understand and take action with things on your screen. Personal context is going to be a big one. This is where Siri can use its knowledge of the information already on your device to help find what you're looking for. And then of course, the biggest one I think is going to be app actions. And this is going to be where Siri can take actions across multiple apps. So after you ask Siri to enhance a photo, for example, by saying, make this photo pop, top, you can ask Siri to drop it in a specific note in the Notes application. So it's going to go, enhance that photo and then drop it into a note, making an action between multiple applications. And that I think is going to be a pretty big deal, especially, once we start understanding some workflows for how that can be beneficial. And I would also expect some other features in 18.4 that are not just specific to Apple Intelligence, but clearly the future of Apple, and especially with software updates, is going to be with Apple Intelligence. So if you don't have a 15 Pro or a 16 series, you should consider upgrading because a lot of the future features are going to be related to Apple Intelligence. Now, also this week, we saw a new AirPods Beta firmware update go out for the AirPods Pro 2 and the AirPods 4. We don't have any details on what was changed, but those betas did go out earlier this week. Now, we also have an update on CarPlay 2.0. So as you guys remember, Apple did say coming in 2024, earlier in January. So in 2025, they still had coming in 2024 on their website for the new generation of CarPlay. So a lot of people are saying, is the whole thing scrapped? Are people just pulling out and it's not going to happen? Well, that's not the case because according to Mac Rumors, several car makers are still planning to support the next-gen CarPlay. Apple gave Mac Rumors a statement, and they said in here that we continue to work closely with several automakers, enabling them to showcase their unique brand and visual design philosophies in the next generation of CarPlay. Each car brand will share more details as they near the announcements of their models that will support the next gen of CarPlay. So pretty generic response, but at least we have confirmation now that CarPlay 2.0 is not scrapped or canceled or anything like that. It's just taking a little while, mostly because the automakers, if I had to guess, because they have to build around that, and you can't just put out a car, every year very easily. That's a process, so I'm sure we're waiting on that. So hopefully in 2025, we'll see some cars actually release with this new CarPlay, which I have a feeling that we will. If you're a Netflix subscriber, we just saw another price hike this past week. So if you are a subscriber, just know that the next time you get a statement, it will be a little bit higher than before. So the cheapest plan went from $6.99 to $7.99 a month. And then if you have the standard plan, that went from $15.50 to $17.99 a month. And then if you have the premium plan, that used to be $22.99 a month. That is now $24.99 a month. Now, I also wanted to address the fake news that's been going around about iPhones with TikTok installed selling on eBay for thousands of dollars. Like even my local news was covering this and people in my town were talking about this, and it's just completely fake. None of these phones are actually selling for thousands of dollars with TikTok on them. So if you are considering doing that, please save your time. And I'll just show you guys. So if you search for TikTok iPhone and then you go to filters, show more, and if we go all the way down here to sold items, this is where you can see which ones have actually sold. So first off, a 14 Pro Max with TikTok downloaded for $200. That's like cheaper than a regular 14 Pro Max. So it's not selling for a premium. Let's see, a 16 Pro with TikTok, $320. Again, that's actually a good deal for a 16 Pro regardless of TikTok. So you're not getting any more there. Here's one, listed for $10,000, but a best offer was accepted, probably for like $100 for a 12 mini, So, $840 here for a 1 terabyte 16 Pro Max, which that's super cheap. That might even be, something fishy going on there. So as you can see, nothing is selling for $1,000. And anytime you see this crossed out number, that just means they accepted the best offer. And, it's not anything near what it was originally listed for. So I'm just trying to tell you guys, don't listen to the fake news out there. These iPhones are not selling for thousands of dollars just because they have TikTok on them. And by the way, we don't know exactly when TikTok is going to be coming back to the App Store. It does still work if you had the app already pre-installed, but we don't know when it's going to return to the App Store. But at this rate, it looks like it will be returning. It's just a matter of when. Anyways, going back to iOS 18.3, the RC build here is actually pretty solid in terms of performance and in terms of battery life. So I do think that we have a minor improvement in both performance and battery life compared to iOS 18.2 or 18.2.1. So we'll have to wait and see, if the new build is any different, but I don't expect it to be. Regardless of the build number, I do think that battery life and performance will be pretty solid here with 18.3. It may take a hit in 18.4 because of all the big changes that are coming, but we'll have to wait and see. Usually the battery life in those 0.4 updates is pretty solid though. But here on 18.3, no issues. If you have any issues with performance or battery life, let me know your experience down in the comments below. Okay, so now we need to talk about what to expect next from Apple. So next up up is going to be the final public release of iOS 18.3, and I would expect that to come on January 27th, the Monday. Usually Apple releases public software updates on Mondays. Theoretically, it could come any day next week, like, any day from Monday to Thursday, but most likely it's going to be on Monday the 27th, maybe the 28th at the latest. But usually it's Monday, and then after that, we should be seeing the first beta of iOS 18.4, the big update that's coming. So it should be, we should see that beta come out the following day after the official release of 18.3. And then as far as the, final release for iOS 18.4, we might not be seeing that until early April. So we'll have to wait and see. Of course, it does depend on a lot of factors, but usually Apple does beta test, big updates like that for longer than like an 18.3, for example. All right, so now let's move on to the latest Apple news. And let's start with how Apple is going to fix Apple Intelligence and Siri. And the reason I say that is because Bloomberg is reporting that Kim Vorath, who has spent almost 4 decades at Apple, is going to join the AI team in hopes of revitalizing and fixing Siri and Apple Intelligence. Now, Vorath is apparently known for managing the development of tough software projects, so she seems like the right one for this job. She was previously working on the Vision Pro with the Vision Pro team, so this kind of indicates that AI is more important to Apple and is currently the biggest challenge for Apple, at least for the time being. It's no longer the Apple Vision Pro, which makes sense. Apple is super behind with AI at this point. I mean, everybody knows it, and it looks like Apple is trying to get ahead. You know what I mean? They're trying to shake things up internally to hopefully, make a bigger splash with Apple Intelligence, because right now, pretty much everybody's opinion is negative with Apple Intelligence. It's very few that see it as a positive, but of course, the ones that view it positively are also the most quiet. So I do think that a lot of people love Apple Intelligence. You just don't hear the people saying that as much as the negativity, just like with anything else in the world. Now, also this past week, we saw a leaked photo of what looks to be the iPhone 17 Air. So this shows the rear camera bar. So this is the pixel-like look that is apparently coming on the iPhone 17 Air. Now, it does not show the side profile. It just shows this right here. This was, obviously shown by Majin Buu over on X. So this is pretty interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about the pixel style camera. And also, we don't know for sure that this is the iPhone 17 Air. It could even be the iPhone SE, the next iPhone SE. But this was a photo that was shared a lot this past week. And also keep in mind, when we're this far away from the iPhone 17 release, you should take leaks like this and photos like this with a massive grain of salt, because a lot of times what we see in Q1 is completely different than what we end up seeing, in September. So just keep that in mind. However, we do have an update from Ming-Chi Kuo about the iPhone 17 lineup and how it's not going to have a smaller dynamic island after all. So this kind of goes against what other analysts like Jeff Poo have been saying for a while, that Apple would add a meta lens for Face ID on the iPhone 17 Pro, which is going to result in a more narrow and smaller dynamic island. But now, according to Kuo, we're not going to see that smaller dynamic island, which to me, not a big deal, but that is something that apparently we're going to have to wait until the iPhone 18 for. Now, speaking of the dynamic island, we also heard this past week that the iPhone SE4 might actually have a dynamic island. Because if you remember before, a lot of the rumors were saying that we're going to have a notch on the iPhone SE4, but according to the source code that was posted here on X, it looks like we might actually have a dynamic island instead of that notch. And if you look at the name in the source code, it does say iPhone SE 4th generation. So that also means that, kind of like what we talked about last week, I'm not expecting this phone to be called the 16E. It's most likely still going to be called the iPhone SE, and this is going to be the 4th generation. Now, we also have an update on the iPad Pro that could be coming later this year. So this comes from the Elec, and they're saying that we're going to see a new 11-inch and 13-inch iPad Pro model later this year. And this is just expected to be a spec bump, so we might be seeing the M5 chip go into the iPad Pro, which is going to be insane, but we're not expecting any type of changes to the design, since it's already, a big jump from the previous iPad Pro to the latest M4 iPad Pro. So it's just going to be a spec bump, but still, we should be seeing that later this year. And then also this past week, we saw that Apple Store in Miami open up. So we talked about this on the previous episode of Apple Weekly, and now it has officially opened in Miami World Center. That's the name of the Apple Store. And this is a really unique store. Like, it has a garden-inspired design. It's very serene and peaceful looking. I'm gonna need to go visit this store because it looks pretty epic. Anyways, guys, that's it for this episode of Apple Weekly. I hope you enjoyed it. No crazy AirTag story this week. I was out of town. Everything was in a rush. That's why this also came out on a Sunday instead of a Saturday. So I hope you guys understand. I'll be back next week with a crazy AirTag story at the end of these Apple Weekly episodes. But anyways, nonetheless, I hope you guys still enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time.